I still remember the sound of that plate, sharp, clean, almost musical, before it shattered into 1,000 pieces across my kitchen floor. It wasn't just porcelain breaking that night. It was respect. It was patience. It was every moment I had stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. That sound marked the exact second my life started changing. It was a Sunday evening, the kind that used to mean something in our family. Dinner, laughter, everyone gathered around the big oak table I'd polished myself earlier that day. I'd made roast chicken, Clara's favorite, my sister-in-law. Not because I wanted to please her, but because I was trying to keep the peace. For weeks, things had been tense between us. Ever since she moved back into town, she'd been coming over uninvited, with her loud opinions and constant criticism. My husband, Mark, would smile and tell me, "She doesn't mean it, honey. She's just blunt." Blunt? No. She was cruel and he was blind to it. That night, everyone was there. Mark, his mother, his brother, and of course, Clara. The table was full, the food warm, the lights soft. I had hoped maybe, just maybe, things would go smoothly for once. But hope has a funny way of setting you up for heartbreak. It started with something small. It always did. Clara looked around the table and said, "Oh, Linda, you used store-bought rolls again?" I smiled. "Yes, they're from the bakery near my office. Everyone likes them." She laughed, shaking her head. "I just think it's sad. When Mom used to cook, she made everything from scratch. Her tone was sugar-coated, but the poison was clear." My mother-in-law sighed dramatically as if remembering a golden era before I came along. "Clara's right," she said. "Homemade always has more heart." Mark kept eating, pretending not to notice. And I did what I always did. I smiled. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said softly, "You're right. Maybe next time I'll try baking." But Clara wasn't done. She leaned back in her chair, eyeing me with that smug, practiced smirk. "You know, Linda," she began, "Mark told me you've been really busy lately. Work, work, work. Maybe that's why you've been… how do I put it?" She paused, pretending to think. "Emotionally distant." I froze. Her eyes flicked toward Mark, waiting for him to confirm it. He shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "Clara," he said softly, warning her, but not defending me. Never defending me. I felt the heat rise in my chest. I kept my voice calm. "I'm not distant, Clara. I'm just tired." "There's a difference." She snorted. "Oh, come on. We all get tired. But you don't see me taking it out on everyone else." The table went quiet. Her words hit like a slap. For a second, I looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would speak up. But no one did. Not Mark, not his mother. They just kept eating, as if watching a show they'd seen a dozen times before. That's when I realized something. I wasn't just sitting at a dinner table. I was sitting on trial. I tried to stay composed. I took a slow breath, my fork trembling slightly as I set it down. "Clara," I said gently, "I've done nothing but try to keep peace in this family. But your constant comments are…" "Comments?" she interrupted. "You're too sensitive, Linda. Honestly, it's exhausting. Every time we say something, you take it personally." Her laugh was light, mocking. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not visibly, just quietly, deep within. I pushed my chair back. "Excuse me," I said softly. And that's when it happened. Clara slammed her fork down, stood up so fast her chair screeched across the floor, and screamed, "You're selfish, Linda. Always acting like you're the victim. Always making everything about you." And before anyone could react, she grabbed her plate and threw it across the table. It missed me by inches. It hit the floor beside me, exploding into shards that scattered like glass snowflakes. For a moment, everything froze. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. I stared at her, at the wild look in her eyes, the flushed anger, the trembling hands. She looked almost proud of what she'd done. My mother-in-law gasped. "Clara!" she shouted, but not out of concern for me, out of embarrassment, out of shock that her perfect daughter had finally gone too far. Mark stood, his voice weak. "Clara, that's enough." But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I slowly crouched down, picked up the biggest piece of the shattered plate, and held it in my hand. The edge was sharp, white, clean, like a metaphor for everything I had endured. I looked up at Clara, then at Mark, and I smiled. Not the polite, fragile smile they were used to. A calm, final one. "Don't worry," I said quietly. "I'll clean it up." My voice was steady, even though my heart was racing. I gathered the shards carefully, piece by piece, my reflection fractured in each tiny mirror of broken porcelain. Nobody moved to help me. Not one person. When I was done, I stood up, threw the pieces in the trash, washed my hands, and walked to the window. Outside, the night was still. The world kept turning, as if nothing had happened. But inside me, everything had changed. Clara muttered something under her breath, something about drama. I ignored it. I turned to Mark. "Is this what family means to you?" I asked softly. He looked torn, eyes darting between his sister and me. "Linda, please," he said. "Let's just calm down." "Calm down," that's all he ever said. I took a deep breath. "You know what, Mark? I'm done calming down. I've spent years keeping peace in a war I never started." He blinked, unsure what to say. Clara rolled her eyes. "Oh, please don't act like a martyr now. Everyone knows you love playing the victim." Her words sliced through the air. I turned slowly to face her. "No, Clara," I said quietly. "Victims stay silent. I'm just getting started." The air grew thick, heavy, charged with something unspoken. Mark reached out a hand. "Linda, let's just talk about this later." I stepped back. "No, Mark, we'll talk when you learn the difference between loyalty and fear." And with that, I walked upstairs. In our bedroom, I closed the door gently behind me and leaned against it. My hands were trembling, my chest tight, my throat aching from holding back tears. But I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I stood there staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes red. But there was something new there. A quiet strength I hadn't seen before. I realized something in that moment. People like Clara thrive on reactions, on weakness, on watching others break, so I wouldn't give her that. Not anymore. Downstairs, I could hear the muffled sounds of Mark and his mother whispering. Clara's angry voice cutting through every few seconds. I caught fragments. "She's overreacting. Always dramatic. And poor Mark, what he puts up with." Each word stung, but also fueled something fierce inside me. I walked to my desk, pulled out a small leather notebook. A gift from Rachel, my best friend, years ago. The first page was blank, so I wrote, "Sunday." Clara called me selfish. Threw a plate. Mark said nothing. And then I paused, staring at the ink as it dried. It felt almost therapeutic. So I kept writing. Every insult, every humiliation, every moment they tried to twist the truth. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about truth. My truth. By the time I put the pen down, it was well past midnight. The house was quiet now, but I could feel the weight of what had happened lingering in every corner. Somewhere deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I stood by the window watching the moonlight spill across the garden, silver and cold. The night air was sharp, but it felt cleansing. And for the first time in years, I whispered to myself, not in defeat, but in promise. They think I'll stay silent again. They have no idea who they're dealing with. That night, as I lay in bed beside a man who had once promised to protect me, I realized something that sent a chill through me. Maybe it wasn't Clara who broke me that night. Maybe it was the silence of everyone who watched her do it. But silence, I decided, could be powerful, if you knew how to use it. And as the moonlight faded across the room, I made a vow I intended to keep. They may have thrown a plate tonight, but soon I'd throw back the truth. The next morning, the house was quieter than usual. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from avoidance. I could hear footsteps downstairs, soft, hesitant, like everyone was trying not to disturb something fragile. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was fear of what would happen next. Either way, I knew one thing for sure. Nothing was ever going to be the same again. I got out of bed slowly, the events of last night playing over in my mind like a broken film reel. Clara's voice, sharp, venomous. Mark's silence, heavier than her scream. And that sound, the plate shattering, echoing in my bones. I stood by the window, looking out at the garden. The roses I'd planted 2 years ago were in bloom, red and proud, defying the autumn wind. Funny how something so delicate could still stand tall after being battered by storms. Maybe that's what I'd become. Something they tried to break but couldn't. When I went downstairs, everyone was already gathered in the living room. Mark sat on the couch, his mother beside him, and Clara looked perfectly composed, sipping her coffee like nothing had happened. "Morning," I said softly. No one answered, just the ticking clock on the wall and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I could feel their eyes flicker toward me. Cautious, judging. Finally, Mark cleared his throat. "Linda, we need to talk." He said it in that rehearsed tone, the one he used when he wanted to sound calm but was terrified of confrontation. "About last night," he continued, "things got out of hand." "Out of hand?" I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. "Your sister threw a plate at me, Mark." His mother gasped as if I'd said something scandalous. "She didn't throw it at you, dear. She was upset. You know how emotional Clara can be." I turned to her. "So emotional that she tried to hit me with a plate?" Her lips tightened. "You're exaggerating." And Clara, sitting there smugly, just smiled. "Oh, please, Linda, you act like I attacked you." It slipped. "I was angry, yes, but I didn't mean to." "Enough," I said sharply. For once, my voice carried authority. Not pleading, not trembling. Just calm, cold clarity. You can twist the story however you like, but I was there. I know what happened. Clara leaned forward. "You really think you're innocent in all this? You've been cold, distant, acting like you're above everyone else. You bring this tension, Linda. You always have." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "Clara, please." "No, let her talk," I said quietly. "I want to hear what she thinks I did wrong." Clara smirked. "You married into this family and decided you were better than us. You think your job, your fancy friends, your perfect manners make you superior. You treat us like charity cases." I almost laughed. "That's not true, and you know it." She shrugged. "Maybe not in your head, but actions speak louder, Linda. You're always so busy working, too busy to help Mom, too busy to join family dinners. You've isolated yourself, and then you act like we pushed you away." Her words were carefully chosen, meant to sound reasonable, almost logical. That's how manipulators work. They twist the truth until even the victim starts questioning their own memory. Mark sighed. "Look, I think everyone needs to take a step back. Clara, you should apologize." Clara's eyes flashed with indignation. "Apologize? For what? For being honest?" He turned to me helplessly. "Linda, can we please not make this worse?" I stared at him, the man who had once sworn to stand by me through everything. And in that moment I realized I was alone. There was no we. There was only me. After that, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. Meals became silent. Small conversations stopped. Clara still came by often. Too often. Claiming she needed to check on Mom. But I knew the truth. She was here to remind me that she belonged, and I didn't. Mark tried to act normal, but I could see it in his eyes. The hesitation, the guilt, the quiet resentment for being caught in the middle. Every night I'd lie awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering how something once warm could turn so cold. One evening, I decided I couldn't take the silence anymore. As Mark sat reading on the couch, I asked softly, "Do you believe me?" He looked up, confused. "Believe you about what?" "About Clara. About what she did. About how she treats me." He hesitated, then sighed. "Linda, I believe you think she means harm. But she's just outspoken. That's how she is." There it was again. The dismissal. The gaslighting disguised as understanding. I swallowed hard. If I had thrown a plate at her, would you say the same thing? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was the answer. That night I took out my leather notebook again. Every word Clara said, every insult disguised as advice, every time Mark defended her, I wrote it all down, with dates, times, and witnesses. Because if there's one thing I'd learned, it's that truth fades when it isn't written down. And I refused to let them erase mine. The following weeks felt like living in a cold war. We didn't fight, but we didn't talk either. I went to work early, came home late, spent hours in my garden, hands buried in the soil, the only place where I still felt peace. Clara, on the other hand, made herself at home. She'd show up unannounced, carrying groceries or gifts for Mark's mother, always pretending to be the dutiful daughter. Sometimes I'd catch her whispering to Mark, their voices low, their eyes shifting when I entered the room. I didn't know what she was saying, but I knew it wasn't good. Then one day, something happened that made everything worse. It was a Saturday afternoon. Mark's mother called a family lunch. I almost refused to go, but something told me I needed to be there, to see what they were plotting. When I entered the dining room, Clara was already there, her face glowing with self-satisfaction. Mark looked tense, avoiding my eyes. His mother smiled too sweetly. "Linda," she began, "we've been talking. We think it would be better for everyone if you took a little break." I frowned. "A break?" Clara nodded. "You've been so stressed lately. Maybe a few weeks away would help you clear your mind." I looked at Mark. "You agree with this?" He sighed. "It's just temporary. Everyone's on edge. Maybe some space would help." "Space?" I repeated. "You're asking me to leave my own home." His mother interrupted. "It's our home, dear. You married into this family, remember?" My chest tightened. They weren't even hiding it anymore. They wanted me out. I felt the room spinning, anger and disbelief flooding my veins. I stood up slowly. "Do you hear yourselves? I'm being pushed out for wanting basic respect." Clara's voice was calm, almost pitying. "No one's pushing you out, Linda. We're just concerned. For your health." Health, that word again. The oldest trick in the book. Make the victim look unstable. I looked around the table, one face at a time. Mark, his mother, Clara. 3 people I once thought were family. And suddenly I knew. This wasn't about peace or space. It was about control. They wanted me gone because I stopped being silent. I left the table without another word. As I walked upstairs, I could hear Clara whisper, "See? There she goes again, overreacting." And Mark's weary sigh followed. In the bedroom, I closed the door and locked it. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking. I could have cried. I could have screamed. But instead, I did something else. I opened my notebook again. And this time, I wrote in bold letters across the top of a new page. Step 1. Protect myself. Because I realized something vital. Clara wasn't just a bully. She was strategic. She wanted to break me down bit by bit until I either snapped or left voluntarily. But she had underestimated me. Over the next few days, I became quiet, not defeated, calculating. I started keeping digital backups of my notes. I recorded conversations, subtle ones, innocent ones, the kind that seemed harmless until you heard the tone behind the words. Every lie, every manipulation, every little betrayal. I smiled when Clara mocked me. I nodded when my mother-in-law lectured me about being grateful. I even thanked Mark when he suggested I take some time to reflect. They thought they were winning. They had no idea I was building my case, one sentence at a time. One evening, Rachel called. "Hey, stranger," she said, her voice bright as ever. It had been weeks since I'd spoken to her. I hesitated before answering, afraid I'd break down. When I told her everything, the plate, the accusations, the cold silence, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said firmly, "Linda, this isn't family. This is abuse wrapped in politeness." I felt my throat tighten. I don't even know what to do anymore. "Then start with this," she said. "Talk to your lawyer, quietly, don't warn them. Don't threaten, just prepare." Her words hit me like a light in a dark tunnel. "Talk to my lawyer." It sounded final, powerful, like a line I could finally draw in the sand. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, flipping through the pages of my notebook, rereading every entry, every wound disguised as family love. And I realized I had enough to prove a pattern, enough to defend myself, enough to fight back. The next morning, before anyone woke up, I got dressed, slipped my notebook into my bag, and walked out the door. The air was cold, but it felt like freedom. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. If they wanted war, I was finally ready. Because this time, I wouldn't fight with tears. I'd fight with truth, and I'd fight smart. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. The air was still, quiet, the kind of silence that feels sacred. It was a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind that morning. I sat in the waiting room, clutching my leather notebook to my chest like a shield. My fingers traced the creases of the worn cover, a witness to weeks of gaslighting, cruelty, and silence. Each word inside that book was a scar, and I was ready to show them all. "Mrs. Hayes," the assistant called softly. I stood, straightened my coat, and followed her into a bright, minimalist office. Behind the desk sat Eleanor Pierce, my lawyer. A woman in her late 40s, sharp eyes, calm voice. The kind of person who didn't need to raise her tone to command attention. She looked up from a file and smiled faintly. "Linda, please, have a seat." I sat down, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Eleanor folded her hands. "You mentioned on the phone you needed advice on family matters?" I nodded, hesitating. "Yes, I'm not sure where to start. It's complicated." She leaned back slightly, patient. "Take your time. Tell me everything from the beginning." And so I did. I told her about the plate, how it shattered near my face, how Clara called me selfish, how Mark stood there, silent. I told her about the manipulation, the Cold War, the suggested break from my own home. Every word felt like reopening a wound. But Eleanor didn't interrupt. She just listened, quietly, completely. When I finished, the room was silent. Then she said, "You did the right thing by coming here." Her words were simple, but they hit hard. For weeks, I'd been made to believe I was overreacting, dramatic, unstable. And now, here was someone, calm, objective, professional, telling me I wasn't crazy. She opened a file. "Let's establish some things. You and your husband jointly own the house, correct?" "Yes," I said. "But his mother and sister act like it's theirs." She nodded. "Do you have any evidence of their behavior? Messages, recordings, written notes?" I placed my notebook on her desk. "Everything's in here. I've written it all down." Eleanor smiled faintly. "You're more prepared than most of my clients." "That's good." She spent the next hour reviewing my notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Her pen moved fast, underlining, circling, making small annotations in the margins. Finally, she looked up. "Legally, you're in a very strong position. But emotionally, I can tell this has broken you down." I looked away, blinking back tears. "I just wanted peace, Eleanor. I wanted respect." Her voice softened. "And you will have it. But peace isn't given, Linda. It's taken. Carefully, strategically." She closed the file. "For now, don't confront them. Don't mention you've spoken to a lawyer. Just observe. Continue documenting. But be prepared. The moment they realize you're pulling away, they'll double down." I nodded, my heart pounding. "I understand." She smiled slightly. "Good, then this is what we'll do." As Eleanor outlined the plan, I felt something stir inside me. Something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. We would start by securing my financial assets, my savings, my accounts, my name on the house deed. She would draft a notice, quiet but firm, ensuring my rights were protected. No sudden moves, no emotional outbursts, just quiet legal precision. Before I left, she said, "Linda, revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes the smartest revenge is simply taking back what they thought they owned. Your voice, your peace, your dignity." I nodded slowly. "I'm ready." Walking out of the office, I felt taller. The air outside was crisp, the sky pale blue. For the first time in months, the world didn't feel heavy. I stopped at a nearby cafe, ordered tea, and sat by the window, watching people walk by. Couples laughed, children tugged their parents' hands, strangers smiled. And I wondered, when had I stopped living like that? When had my life become a quiet prison guarded by family? My phone buzzed. A message from Mark. "Where are you? Mom's worried." I stared at the screen, then typed slowly, "Out. Don't wait for me for dinner." No explanation, no apology, just boundaries. When I returned home that evening, Clara's car was already parked in the driveway. Of course it was. I paused for a moment, gripping my bag tighter. Then I walked in. Their laughter stopped instantly. Clara was sitting at the dining table sipping wine, while Mark and his mother whispered over dinner. "Ah," Clara said sweetly, "the Queen returns." I ignored her and hung up my coat. Mark looked at me cautiously. "Where were you?" "Out," I said again, walking toward the stairs. Clara smirked. "Out? Doing what? Therapy? Yoga? Or maybe writing another one of your notes?" I stopped halfway up the stairs and turned to her. For once, I didn't hide the fire in my eyes. "Actually," I said calmly, "I was meeting someone who helps people who've had enough." Her smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll find out soon enough," I said and went upstairs. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of anxiety this time, but anticipation. It was strange. The fear that used to paralyze me had transformed into focus. I knew now what I had to do. Over the next few days, I followed Eleanor's advice to the letter. I didn't argue. I didn't react. I just watched and gathered. Clara's words became more careless, her mother's tone sharper. And Mark kept pretending everything was fine. But I could sense it. They were uneasy. They could feel the shift. I was no longer the one shrinking. A week later, Eleanor called. "Linda, it's time," she said. She had prepared a letter. Not a threat, but a notice of intent. It detailed my rights, the joint ownership of the property, and my legal entitlement to peace and safety in my home. It would go to Mark and, if needed, his mother. I hesitated. Won't this make things worse? Eleanor's voice was calm. Sometimes things need to break before they can be rebuilt. Are you ready for that? I thought of the plate Clara had thrown, how it had shattered at my feet. Yes, things had already broken. Now it was my turn to decide what came next. "I'm ready," I said. The letter was delivered 2 days later. I came home from work that evening to find Mark pacing the living room, the envelope still open on the table. Clara was there too, of course, arms crossed, expression cold. "What is this, Linda?" Mark demanded, his voice trembling. "Read it," I said quietly, setting my bag down. "I did read it," he snapped. "You sent a lawyer's notice to your own husband?" Clara added mockingly, "Wow, Linda, didn't know you were so dramatic." I turned to her. "Dramatic? You threw a plate at me." She laughed. "You're still on about that?" "Enough!" Mark shouted. "Both of you. I can't believe this is happening." I faced him, calm and steady. "It's happening because I let it go too long. Because I allowed you to let them disrespect me in my own home. Not anymore." His mother entered the room, voice trembling with false innocence. "Is this really necessary, dear? We're family." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, family doesn't silence you. Family doesn't gaslight you. Family doesn't throw things at you and call it love." The room went silent. For the first time, none of them had anything to say. Mark finally muttered, "You've changed." I smiled faintly. "No, I've just stopped apologizing." I turned to leave, but Clara's voice stopped me. "You think a lawyer will fix your life? You're pathetic." I paused, then looked back over my shoulder. "Maybe, but at least I'm not cruel." Her face hardened, but I didn't wait to see her reply. I walked upstairs, my heart pounding, my legs shaking, but inside there was a strange calm. It was done. The first shot had been fired. Later that night I sat by the window again. The moonlight poured through the curtains, soft and silver. Somewhere downstairs I could hear them whispering. Angry, confused, scrambling for control. But it didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time I wasn't scared of what they might do. I was focused on what I would do. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. Revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it's silence that breaks them the most. And she was right. They expected me to scream, to fight, to crumble. But instead, I gave them silence. Calm, strategic, terrifying silence. Over the following days, the balance began to shift. Mark became distant, not angry, just uncertain. Clara avoided me, her confidence cracking around the edges. Even his mother spoke softly now, cautious, almost nervous. They didn't know what I was planning, and that scared them more than any confrontation ever could. I went about my days quietly, tidying, cooking, smiling politely. But inside, I was rebuilding myself piece by piece. The notebook grew thicker. Eleanor's emails became more frequent, and my resolve stronger than ever, because I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was preparing for justice. One night, as I closed my journal, I whispered to myself, "They called me selfish for fighting for peace, but they'll soon learn what true selfishness looks like, when they lose everything they thought they controlled." And with that thought, I turned off the light. The war had begun, and this time it would end on my terms. There's a strange quiet that follows chaos. It's not peace, not really. It's the kind of quiet that feels like a storm is waiting just beyond the horizon. That's what my house felt like after the lawyer's notice arrived. Everyone pretended to move on, but I could feel the tension in every step, every sigh, every fake "good morning." Mark walked around on eggshells. His mother, Margaret, busied herself with chores she hadn't done in years, just to avoid looking at me. And Clara was the worst of all. She turned her cruelty into sugar. Her insults became smiles. Her manipulation, apologies. It started subtly. One morning, she appeared in the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee. "Truce?" she said, setting one in front of me. I looked up from my notebook. She wore her sweetest smile, the one she used when she wanted something. "Truce?" I repeated slowly. "For what?" She laughed lightly. "Come on, Linda, we've all been under a lot of stress. I might have overreacted. But you know how family gets. It's silly to hold grudges." Her words were smooth, but her eyes sharp. Measuring me, I didn't touch the coffee. "Overreacted?" I said calmly. "You threw a plate at me." Her smile faltered just slightly. "I didn't mean to hit you. It slipped." "Funny," I said, "because it slipped right after you called me selfish." She blinked, then leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Look, if you want to keep this drama going, fine. But Mark's miserable. His mother's upset. You're tearing this family apart." I closed my notebook slowly. "No, Clara, I'm just refusing to be the glue anymore." Her jaw tightened. The smile vanished. Without another word, she picked up her untouched coffee and walked away. That was her first apology. Not to heal, but to test the waters. To see if the old Linda was still there. The one who forgave too easily. When that didn't work, she changed tactics. The next few days were full of little performances. Sweet gestures, quiet sighs, forced laughter. One night she made dinner my favorite dish. "Thought we could all eat together again," she said brightly. Mark seemed relieved. "That's nice, Clara, thank you." Margaret smiled weakly. "Maybe things are getting better." I looked at the table candles. Wine. The smell of roasted vegetables. On the surface, it was beautiful. But it wasn't peace. It was bait. I sat down silently, waiting. Clara poured me a glass of wine, her tone light and kind. "I really do want to make things right, Linda," she said. "I hate seeing the family divided." I stared at her, then asked, "What exactly do you want to make right?" She hesitated. All of it. The misunderstandings, the tension. You sending that lawyer thing, it made everyone so upset. "So the problem," I said softly, "is that I defended myself." Her hand froze midair. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," I said. She smiled again, but her voice was thinner now. "You always twist everything, don't you?" "I'm trying to apologize." "No," I said. "You're trying to reset control." The room went silent. Mark stared between us, confused, helpless. Margaret fiddled with her napkin. Finally, Clara stood, her face stiff. "I don't know what your problem is, Linda. I'm just trying to fix this family." I looked at her calmly. "Then maybe stop breaking it." After that night, her fake kindness faded. Her apologies turned sharper disguised as guilt trips. "Mark's been so stressed lately," she'd say loudly when I entered the room. "It must be so hard for him, poor thing, trying to handle all this legal mess." Or, "I wish Linda understood how much we all care about her. But I guess she prefers lawyers over family." Each word was a needle. A performance carefully crafted to make me look like the villain. But I didn't react, and my silence drove her mad. Mark tried to mediate at first. "Linda," he said one evening, "Clara's trying. Can't you meet her halfway?" I laughed softly. You mean the way she met me halfway by throwing things? He rubbed his forehead. You're both stubborn. I just want things to go back to normal. Normal? I repeated. You mean where I was walking on eggshells while they insulted me in my own home? He sighed. You're making everything so hard. That line hit harder than any insult Clara could throw. I turned to him, my voice shaking not with fear, but anger. You mean I'm making it hard for you to pretend this is okay? You stood there and let her humiliate me. And now that I'm standing up for myself, I'm the problem? He didn't answer, just looked away. That was the moment I realized something. Mark didn't want peace. He wanted silence. He wanted the illusion of harmony, even if it came at the cost of my dignity. The next morning, Clara knocked on my door again. Can we talk? She said softly. I opened the door halfway. About what? Her eyes were red, her voice trembling, the perfect picture of remorse. Linda, I know I've said and done things I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. Truly. For a second, I almost believed her. Almost. Then she added, but you have to admit, you've made it really hard to talk to you lately. There it was, the real reason. Her apology wasn't to heal. It was to reset blame. Clara, I said, do you know what a real apology sounds like? She blinked. What? It sounds like I hurt you. I was wrong. I'll change. Not, I'm sorry, but you... anything. Her mouth fell open, but no words came out. I closed the door gently. Behind it, I could hear her breathing, quick in a quiet fury building. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. They're losing control. The apologies aren't working anymore. Eleanor called the next morning. How's the house? She asked. I smiled faintly. Like a theater. Every day, a new performance. Good, she said. Let them perform. Every act exposes them more. Keep writing. Keep observing. Her calm voice grounded me again. Eleanor had warned me about this, how manipulators often switch between charm and cruelty when they start losing power. She called it emotional whiplash, and Clara had mastered it. But I wasn't the same audience anymore. A few days later, Margaret decided to try her version of peacemaking. She came into the kitchen one morning, voice trembling like a tired grandmother in an old play. Linda, dear, she said, I know things have been difficult. But don't you think it's time to move on? Holding grudges only hurts you. I smiled politely. I agree. That's why I'm letting go of all the guilt they tried to hand me. Her face stiffened. You've changed. You used to be so kind. I'm still kind, I said. Just not compliant. That ended that conversation. One evening, Mark came home early. He sat across from me, shoulders slumped. I don't recognize us anymore, he said quietly. Maybe that's because I stopped pretending, I replied. He rubbed his face. I hate all this fighting. Can't we just start over? Start over? I echoed. Without accountability? Without change? He sighed. You're so cold now, Linda. I looked at him, feeling the weight of every insult, every silence, every moment he stood by while I was torn apart. I'm not cold, Mark, I said softly. I'm just done burning myself to keep everyone else warm. The next day, Clara exploded. No more fake smiles, no sweet tones. The mask finally cracked. She stormed into the living room where I was reading. You've turned everyone against me, she shouted. Even Mom says you're impossible. I looked up calmly. People see what they want to see. I just stopped covering for you. She glared, shaking. You think you're so perfect, so noble. You're pathetic, Linda. Nobody will ever believe you. I stood, slow and quiet. Her anger didn't scare me anymore, it exposed her. Maybe not everyone, I said. But the right people already do. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Ask Mark, I said. He's seen the documents. That was a lie, not a full one, but enough to make her uneasy. Her confidence faltered just long enough for me to walk past her. That night, I received an email from Eleanor. Phase 2 ready. Awaiting your confirmation. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling not from fear, but anticipation. This was it. The apologies had failed. The guilt had lost its power. Now it was time for action. I typed back, confirmed. Proceed. Then I sat back and smiled, the first real smile in months. Because for once, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. As I turned off the lamp that night, I whispered to myself, "They thought they could pacify me with apologies. But I've learned something when manipulators say, 'I'm sorry.' It's never to heal you. It's to reset control." I looked out the window at the moonlight spilling across the yard. "Not anymore," I said quietly. "This time I'm writing the ending." And as I closed my eyes, I realized the power had already shifted. Not because I fought louder, but because I stopped playing their game. There comes a point when silence stops being peaceful and starts becoming dangerous. For weeks, Claire and I danced around each other like enemies forced to share a stage. Her fake smiles grew tighter, her charm thinner. The tension was thick enough to choke on. And then, finally, everything snapped. It happened on a Sunday, the one day everyone in the family insisted on togetherness. The morning started like any other. Mark was in the garden, pretending to fix the sprinkler system. Margaret sat in the living room with her Bible, though I could tell she wasn't reading, just flipping pages to look busy. And Clara, she was cooking. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house warm, comforting, familiar. Almost enough to make me forget the storm building beneath it. Almost. When I walked into the kitchen, Clara smiled too brightly. "Lunch will be ready soon," she said. "I thought we could all eat together, like old times." "Old times?" I asked softly. "You mean before or after the plate-throwing incident?" Her lips twitched. "Before. When you weren't so defensive." I laughed quietly. "When I was too quiet to defend myself, you mean?" Her jaw tightened. Then she turned away, muttering something under her breath about ungrateful people. I let it go for the moment. By noon, the table was set. Mark looked hopeful. Margaret looked nervous, and Clara looked rehearsed like an actress who'd practiced her lines in the mirror all morning. We started eating. For the first few minutes, there was an eerie kind of calm. The clinking of silverware, the occasional polite pass the salt. Then Margaret cleared her throat. "Linda," she said, her tone falsely sweet. "I heard you've been talking to a lawyer again. Is that true?" I set down my fork slowly. "Yes," I said. "It's true." Clara's fork froze midair. "For what now?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Planning to sue us for breathing too loudly?" Mark frowned. "Clara." "No, Mark," I interrupted, keeping my tone steady. "Let her speak. She's been dying to." Clara leaned back, crossing her arms. "You act like such a victim, Linda. But you're the one tearing this family apart. You call lawyers, send letters, make threats, and for what? Because someone hurt your precious feelings?" I met her eyes. "Because someone thought they could destroy my dignity and walk away smiling." Her face reddened. "You're unbelievable. We gave you a home, treated you like family." I laughed, not bitterly, just quietly. "You treated me like a servant who forgot her place." The room went still. Mark's fork clattered against his plate. "Linda, please, can we not?" But Clara was already on her feet. Her voice rose, sharp and trembling. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? You think everyone's against you. Maybe that's because you push people away with your bitterness." "Bitterness?" I said. "No, Clara, what you're seeing is clarity." She slammed her hand on the table, sending her wine glass toppling over. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like a stain that wouldn't wash out fitting, really. "Stop acting like the victim," she screamed. "You're the problem. You always were." Margaret gasped. "Clara, that's enough." But Clara wasn't listening. She pointed at me, shaking. "You don't deserve this family. You don't deserve Mark." Mark stood, his voice trembling. "Clara, stop it." But she just laughed loud, bitter, broken. "Why should I? Everyone's thinking it. She's a manipulator, Mark. She's trying to destroy us." I rose slowly, my hand steady even though my heart pounded in my chest. "I'm not destroying anything," I said quietly. "I'm exposing what's already been broken." Clara froze. Her chest heaved. Her eyes darted to Mark, desperate for support. But Mark said nothing. For the first time, he didn't defend her. He just stared at her, at the woman he thought he knew, as if seeing her for the first time. That silence broke her more than my words ever could. She turned on him, furious. "Say something. Don't just stand there." Mark swallowed hard. "Clara, she's right." The words fell like a stone. "You've gone too far," he said. I've been blind, but not anymore. You humiliated her. You've humiliated all of us." Clara's face twisted hurt, disbelief, rage. She looked around the room like a cornered animal, then let out a shaky laugh. "Of course," she said bitterly. "You're all against me now. Fine, go ahead. Believe her lies. You'll see what happens." Then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret looked stunned, tears in her eyes. Mark just stood there, pale and still. And me. For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. Not victory, not triumph, just release. That night, I sat on the porch watching the moon rise. The air was cool, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm. Mark joined me quietly. For a while, we didn't speak. Finally, he said, "I didn't know she'd go that far." I nodded slowly. "You did. You just didn't want to admit it." He didn't argue, just sighed, defeated. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for not standing up sooner." I looked at him, really looked. His face was tired, aged by stress and guilt. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just sadness. "Sorry," I said softly, "isn't enough anymore. But it's a start." He nodded. "What happens now?" I looked out at the yard, where the moonlight painted everything silver. "Now," I said, "now we stop pretending. And I finish what I started." He frowned. "The lawyer thing?" "Yes," I said. "The lawyer thing." The next morning, I received a call from Eleanor. Her voice was calm, steady, just like always. "Linda," she said, "the documentation is ready. All we need is your final approval." I took a deep breath. "What happens when I sign it?" "Clara loses her financial hold on the property," Eleanor said. "You'll have complete control. Legally, she won't be able to use your assets again, not even through Mark." I smiled faintly. "Perfect. Are you sure you're ready?" she asked. "I've never been more ready," I said. That afternoon, Clara came home. She didn't say a word, just walked past me up the stairs and slammed her door again. But I could see it in her eyes. Fear. She knew something had shifted. The balance she'd clung to was gone. Margaret avoided me after that, too ashamed, maybe, or too loyal to her daughter to admit the truth. But I didn't need their acceptance anymore. I had something stronger now. Boundaries. 3 days later, Eleanor came to the house with the final papers. We sat at the dining table, the same one where the fight had happened, and signed everything. Each pen stroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Eleanor smiled when we finished. "It's done." I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Thank you," I said. She nodded. "You handled this with grace, Linda. Not everyone could." I smiled faintly. Grace isn't weakness. It's restraint. That evening, Clara confronted me one last time. She cornered me in the hallway, her face pale and eyes wide. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I know you're up to something." I met her gaze calmly. "I protected what's mine." She scoffed. "You think this will make you happy? Taking everything from me?" I shook my head. "No, Clara, I didn't take anything. I just stopped giving you what you never deserved." Her voice cracked. "You'll regret this." I smiled sadly. "No. You will, because one day you'll realize manipulation can't buy loyalty." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. For once, she had nothing left to throw, no insult, no guilt, no plate. Just silence. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room, sipping tea. The house felt different, lighter somehow, like it could finally breathe again. Mark came in quietly and sat beside me. "Eleanor called," he said. "She told me everything." I nodded. "I thought she might." He looked at me, his eyes soft. "You really did all this to protect us, didn't you?" I smiled faintly. "To protect myself. And maybe, in the process, to remind everyone else what respect looks like." He nodded slowly. "You were right. I was blind. I let her control everything, even me. You see it now?" I said gently. "That's enough." He reached for my hand. "I don't deserve forgiveness." I squeezed his fingers lightly. "Forgiveness isn't a reward, Mark. It's a choice. And I'm still deciding." That night, as I went to bed, I realized something. Clara's greatest weapon had never been her anger. It was her ability to twist guilt into obedience. And by refusing to play that game anymore, I'd won quietly, completely. No shouting, no vengeance, just justice. As I drifted to sleep, I whispered to myself, "They tried to break me with cruelty, and they tried to bind me with apologies. But in the end, the only person who needed to change was me." You'd think that after signing a legal document, the world would instantly change. It doesn't. Sometimes it's quieter than you expect, too quiet. For a few days, life in the house went on like nothing happened. Clara stayed in her room, sulking. Margaret pretended to pray more often, though I could see the guilt in her eyes. Mark kept his head down, avoiding confrontation. But I knew, change doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits patient, silent, and inevitable. The shift began the next week on a Monday morning. I was in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. Through the glass, I saw a man in a neat gray suit, holding a thick brown envelope. He smiled politely when I opened the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Dawson. I have some documents for you and Mr. Dawson to sign acknowledgement of transfer of ownership." Clara, who was walking down the stairs at that very moment, froze mid-step. "What did he just say?" she demanded. The man looked awkward. "I just need signatures, ma'am." "Property confirmation, legal procedure." Clara's face went pale. "Property? What property?" I smiled politely. "The house." Her mouth fell open. "The what?" "The house, Clara," I said calmly. "It's under my full name now." The paperwork was finalized last week. Her eyes darted between me and the man, disbelief twisting her face. "You're lying." I turned the document around for her to see black ink, official seals, and my name, Linda Dawson, written neatly beside the word owner. Her expression shattered. You can't do this." "This house was Dad's." "Was," I said gently, "until your brother and I took full responsibility for it. You remember that, don't you? You were there when you signed the agreement years ago." Mark came out of his office, confused. "What's going on?" Clara spun toward him, furious. "She's stealing the house from us." I didn't flinch. "No, Clara, I'm protecting it from you." The man in the suit, sensing the tension, quickly excused himself. "I'll just wait outside for signatures." When the door shut, the silence was thick enough to choke on. "Linda," Mark said carefully, "maybe we should discuss this." "There's nothing to discuss," I said firmly. I gave her every chance to respect this home. She used it as a weapon instead. Clara shook her head violently. "You're unbelievable. You're punishing me because I told you the truth." I met her gaze. "No. I'm holding you accountable because you thought I never would." She laughed bitterly. "You can't just rewrite history like this. You think a few papers make you powerful?" I smiled faintly. "No, Clara, the papers don't make me powerful. They protect me from your power." Mark rubbed his temples. "Please, both of you stop. This isn't helping." But Clara wouldn't stop. Her voice rose, cracking with fury. "You betrayed me, Mark. You're siding with her against your own family." Mark looked at her, really looked. "You are my family, Clara, but so is she, and you've treated her like an enemy since day one." Her eyes filled with tears, though I couldn't tell if they were real or performative. "I just wanted what's fair," she said. "And you got it," I said quietly. "Over and over again, but you wanted what's mine too, and that's where it ends." That afternoon, word spread faster than wildfire. Margaret called me to the living room, her tone sharp. "Linda, what is this nonsense Clara's telling me? Something about you taking the house?" I didn't raise my voice. "It's not nonsense. It's true." Margaret's face turned red. "How could you? That house has been in our family for generations." I looked her straight in the eyes. "Then maybe your family should have treated it and me with a little more respect." She gasped as if I'd slapped her. "You're ungrateful." I smiled sadly. "No, Margaret. I'm done being grateful for being tolerated." For a long moment, she just stared at me, stunned, furious, and powerless. Then she stood up, her hands trembling. "You've turned my son against me. You've poisoned this family?" I shook my head. "No, Margaret. You did that yourselves. I just stopped pretending it was normal." She stormed out, slamming her bedroom door behind her. And that was that. That night, when Mark and I sat down for dinner, the tension was heavy but different. Quieter. More final. He kept glancing at me between bites, as if trying to read my thoughts. Finally, he said, You know they'll never forgive you, right? I nodded. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for peace. He hesitated. And if peace means losing them, I smiled faintly. Then it's worth it. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. For the first time, I think he saw it how much I'd given, how much I'd endured, how much I'd lost. 2 days later, I went into town to meet Eleanor. We sat in her small office, sunlight pouring through the window, dust dancing in the air. She had a copy of the final paperwork in front of her. "Well," she said, "you've done it. They can't touch a thing now." I exhaled, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. "It doesn't feel like victory," I admitted. She smiled knowingly. "Because you didn't do it for revenge. You did it for survival." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Maybe that's exactly what it was: not winning, not conquering, but surviving with dignity and tact. When I got home, the air felt heavy. The front door was slightly open. Inside, Clara and Margaret were in the living room, whispering. Their voices stopped when they saw me. Margaret's eyes were cold. "We've spoken to our lawyer," she said stiffly. "He says we still have rights." I tilted my head. "Oh? Did he also mention the document you both signed years ago, the one giving me joint ownership? Because that makes this house legally mine now." Clara's lips trembled with rage. "You tricked us." "No," I said softly. "You underestimated me." Mark came downstairs, sensing the argument. "What's going on now?" I turned to him calmly. "They're upset because they lost control. Again." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Can we not do this anymore?" "Ask them," I said. "I've already made peace." Later that night, I sat in my room, watching the rain slide down the window. Thunder rolled in the distance, soft, steady, cleansing. I thought about everything that had happened, every insult, every accusation, every time I'd swallowed my pride to keep the peace. And, for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for protecting myself. I felt proud. The next morning brought the final blow, not from me, but from fate itself. A letter arrived addressed to Clara and Margaret. It was from their bank. Mark had quietly moved his investments and savings into a separate account, one they couldn't touch. He hadn't told me. I only found out when Clara screamed from the other room. "You took the money too?" she shouted. Mark appeared in the doorway, calm but firm. "I didn't take anything. I just separated what's mine. I'm done being manipulated." Margaret looked at him in shock. "You're punishing your own mother?" He shook his head. "No, I'm protecting my wife." That moment, that single sentence, silenced both of them. For the first time, Mark stood completely on my side. And in that silence, I realized something. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or papers. Sometimes it comes from someone finally saying, "Enough." That evening, Clara packed her bags. She didn't say goodbye, just slammed drawers, muttered curses, and dragged her suitcase out the door. Margaret followed her days later, choosing loyalty over reason. When the door closed behind them, the house was suddenly still. Peaceful. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by quiet, and felt the weight lift from my chest. Mark came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "It's over," he said softly. I nodded, my eyes stinging. "No," I whispered. "It's just beginning." He looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" I turned to him with a small smile. "Now," I said, "we rebuild. Not the house, the respect." That night, as the rain stopped and the sky cleared, I sat on the porch again. The air smelled clean like new beginnings, and I realized something profound. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs quietly on dotted lines. I didn't destroy them. I simply reminded them who they were dealing with, and that perhaps was the sweetest revenge of all. You'd think that peace would feel warm, soft, gentle, but the first few days after Clara and Margaret left, the silence was unnerving. No footsteps on the stairs. No whispered accusations behind doors. No sharp clinking of plates that followed every argument. Just the steady tick of the clock. And the sound of my own heartbeat. Mark tried to fill the quiet. He spent his mornings fixing things that had been broken for years: a leaky faucet, a creaky door, a loose handle on the kitchen cabinet. It was his way of coping, I think, repairing what he could after everything we'd both endured. and every time he looked at me I could see something new in his eyes. Guilt, yes, but also admiration. We were different now. Not husband and wife trying to survive a storm, but two people standing in the calm, realizing the wreckage left behind. One evening, as we sat at the dining table, the same table where so many cruel words had been thrown, Mark reached across and took my hand. "I should have protected you sooner," he said quietly. I looked at him, surprised by the tremor in his voice. "You were trying," I said softly. "You just didn't know how." He shook his head. "No, I was a coward. I let them twist everything. I let them convince me you were the problem." I smiled faintly. "They were loud. I don't blame you for listening." His eyes filled with regret. "You should." We sat there for a while, hands intertwined, saying nothing. The silence was heavy but not suffocating anymore. It was honest. A few days later, I found myself standing in the living room, staring at the family portraits still hanging on the wall. One of them, the big one in the middle, was from Clara's wedding. Everyone smiling, pretending to be perfect. I remembered that day so clearly, how Margaret had whispered little jabs all afternoon. How Clara had accidentally spilled champagne on my dress and laughed it off. How I'd smiled through all of it, desperate to keep the peace. I took the frame down slowly. The glass was cool against my fingertips. For a moment, I thought about throwing it away, but I didn't. Instead, I wrapped it in brown paper and tucked it into the storage closet. Some memories don't need to be destroyed. They just need to be put away somewhere they can't hurt you anymore. The neighbors began to notice the changes, too. Mrs. Patel from next door came by with a plate of samosas one morning. Her eyes flicked around the quiet house before she asked, "Is everything all right? I haven't seen your sister-in-law lately." I smiled. "She's taken a long vacation." Mrs. Patel chuckled knowingly. "Ah, the kind of vacation that doesn't end soon. I laughed genuinely this time. "Something like that." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Good. That woman's energy was bad for this house." Her words made me realize something. The entire neighborhood had seen what I'd tried to hide for years, the cold stares, the constant drama, the humiliation. And I'd thought I was protecting our family's image by staying silent. All I'd really done was protect their cruelty. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I made tea and sat on the porch. The house felt lighter somehow, like it could breathe again. I thought about the years I'd spent here, the laughter, the fights, the late nights cooking alone while everyone else watched TV. And I realized that this place, this home, finally belonged to me in more than just legal terms. It belonged to my peace now. A week passed. Clara called once. I didn't answer. Then she sent a message. "You've destroyed this family. I hope you're proud of yourself." I stared at the words for a long time before typing back, "No, Clara, I just stopped letting you destroy me." Then I blocked her. It felt final and freeing. One afternoon, I visited my lawyer, Eleanor, again, not for legal business, but just to say thank you. She poured me coffee, her office smelling faintly of old books and lemon polish. "You look different," she said with a smile. "Peace suits you." I laughed softly. "It feels strange, like I've forgotten how to live without tension." "That's normal," she said. "When you've lived in constant defense, peace feels like silence until you learn its safety." Her words stayed with me for days. Peace isn't silence. It's safety. That night, as I brushed my hair in front of the mirror, Mark came into the room quietly. He hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking," he said, "about us." My heart tightened. "What about us?" He took a deep breath. "We've both been through hell, and I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But I want to rebuild properly this time." I turned to face him. "You mean, start over?" He nodded. "If you'll let me." I studied him for a long moment. This was the same man who had once stood silent while his mother and sister tore into me. But now there was humility in his eyes and love that looked real, not performative. I nodded slowly. "Starting over sounds nice." For the first time in years, we smiled at each other without guilt between us. Days turned into weeks. The garden began to bloom again, almost like the earth itself was responding to the calm. I planted new roses, bright and full of life. Mark helped me paint the porch. We even started hosting dinners again, small, quiet ones with friends who actually respected us. And every so often I'd catch Mark watching me, a soft, wistful look on his face. "What?" I'd ask, laughing. He'd shake his head, just wondering why it took me so long to see how strong you really are. I'd smile. "Maybe you weren't ready to look." He nodded. "Maybe." One afternoon, while organizing the study, I found an old box tucked away behind the bookshelf. Inside were letters, old ones from when Mark and I were first married. Love notes, plans, dreams of building a future together. I sat on the floor, reading through them with tears in my eyes. We'd been so hopeful once, so full of light. And somehow, over the years, that light had been dimmed by people who thrived on control. But now we had a chance to reclaim it. I placed one of the letters back into an envelope and wrote on the corner, "For the next chapter." It felt symbolic. The next Sunday, Mark and I went to visit a small cottage by the lake, a place I'd always dreamed of owning. It wasn't grand or fancy, but it was quiet, peaceful, and surrounded by trees. As we walked through it, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Mark watched me with a small smile. "You like it?" I turned in a slow circle. "I love it." He took my hand. "Then let's buy it, together, a real fresh start." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out the window at the still water, the sunlight dancing across it, and felt something loosen inside me. Maybe it was forgiveness. Not for them, but for myself. That night, back home, I stood by the fireplace, staring at the framed deed, the one that had once been a weapon but now felt like protection. I whispered to myself, "You did it." Not out of arrogance, but gratitude. Because after all the years of swallowing pain, of being called selfish, dramatic, ungrateful, I had finally learned what real selfishness was. It wasn't protecting yourself. It was demanding someone else destroy themselves for your comfort. And I'd refuse to do that anymore. Before bed, Mark wrapped his arms around me. The house was quiet, truly quiet now. No more battles. No more walking on eggshells. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and our steady breathing. He whispered, "Do you ever think about them?" I nodded, sometimes, but only to remind myself of how far I've come. He pressed a kiss to my forehead. "You deserve this peace, Linda." I smiled. We both do. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized something beautiful. Peace doesn't always come after forgiveness. Sometimes it comes after acceptance. The storm was over. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was healing. And for the first time in years, I was finally home. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a strange calmness. Not the peace that comes from comfort, but the stillness before a storm. I stood before the mirror, smoothing the creases of my pale blue sari. It was the same one Daniel once said made me look too formal for a family woman. Today, I wore it with pride because I was a family woman, just not the kind they wanted me to be. My lawyer, Mr. Jameson, picked me up from home. "You ready for this?" he asked gently. I nodded. "I've been ready for months," I replied, my voice steady, even though my hands trembled slightly. The courthouse was crowded. The air smelled of paper, ink, and tension. Daniel and Emma stood on the opposite side, whispering to their attorney. They didn't even look at me. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they didn't want to see the woman they'd underestimated. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. I could hear the ticking of the clock, the faint hum of the ceiling fan. And in that silence, I whispered to myself, "Let truth speak louder than pain." Daniel's lawyer went first, confident, smooth, rehearsed. He painted me as a controlling, unreasonable woman who drove her husband's family away and caused unnecessary distress. I sat there, expressionless, letting every false word hang in the air. I had learned something about silence. It's powerful when you know you hold the truth. When my turn came, I stood up. The wooden floor creaked under my heels. I looked straight at the judge and then at Daniel. "Your Honor," I began, my voice calm but filled with emotion. "I never came here to destroy anyone's name. I came here to defend mine." I described everything, the insults, the manipulations, the way Emma turned every apology into a weapon, how Daniel stayed silent, how he chose peace over fairness, comfort over courage. But I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I let the truth carry its own weight. I tried to make peace, I said, my eyes never leaving Daniel's, but peace without respect is just silence under pressure. And I've been silent long enough. For a moment, even Daniel's lawyer looked uneasy. Emma, on the other hand, shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting toward the judge. Mr. Jameson then presented the emails, the ones Daniel's family had written behind my back. Messages calling me selfish, a burden, a woman who didn't know her place. There were financial statements, too, showing how Daniel had transferred ownership of the house without telling me, even though I had contributed to it equally. Every document was a reminder not of betrayal, but of awakening. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised his hand. "Let her finish," he said. For the first time, my voice mattered more than their excuses. When the cross-examination ended, the courtroom fell into an awkward hush. Even the reporters in the back were silent, scribbling notes furiously. Daniel avoided my gaze. Emma crossed her arms, her face pale as though the mask she had worn for years had started to crack. During the recess, I went to the courthouse cafe. The air smelled of burnt coffee and old wood. I sat alone, staring out the window, watching leaves drift down from the courthouse trees. That's when Daniel came over. "Mia," he said softly, "you didn't have to do all this." I turned to him slowly. "Didn't have to?" I repeated. "After everything, you think I wanted this?" He sighed, rubbing his temple. "Emma just got carried away. You could have let it go." "Let it go," I whispered. "She threw a plate at me, Daniel. She called me selfish. You stood there and watched. You didn't stop her, and you never stopped them." He opened his mouth but didn't speak. I leaned forward. "I'm not doing this to ruin you. I'm doing this so the next woman, the next wife, the next daughter-in-law doesn't have to lose her self-worth just to be accepted." He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he realized the woman sitting in front of him wasn't the one he could control anymore. She was done begging for peace in a house built on arrogance. When the judge returned, his tone was measured, deliberate. He went through every point, every piece of evidence, every testimony. Finally, he looked up and said, "This case isn't about money or property. It's about respect. And it is clear that Mrs. Mia's dignity was compromised repeatedly, emotionally, and legally. Therefore, I rule in favor of Mrs. Mia." The words echoed through the courtroom. Daniel dropped his head. Emma's jaw tightened. I just sat there, not triumphant, not angry, just still. Because sometimes victory doesn't roar. Sometimes it exhales. Aftermath. When I stepped outside, the afternoon sun felt warm against my face. Reporters asked questions, I ignored them. I didn't want headlines. I wanted closure. Back home, the house was quiet. For the first time in years, it actually felt like mine. No one yelling. No one judging. No one telling me how to live my life. I made myself a cup of tea, slowly, deliberately. The steam rose gently, curling in the air like a whisper. On the table lay the copy of the verdict. I placed my hand over it and smiled faintly. Not because I had won against them, but because I had finally stood up for myself. That night I sat down at my desk and opened a new page in my notebook. I began to write a letter not to Daniel, not to Emma, but to myself. Dear Mia, you were called selfish because you chose yourself. You were called dramatic because you spoke the truth. You were mocked because you refused to break. But look at you now, standing tall in the quiet of your own freedom. I stopped writing for a moment and smiled through tears. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. I felt reborn. 6 months passed. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. I opened my own small legal advocacy group for women facing emotional manipulation and financial abuse. Each time I helped someone find her voice again, I felt pieces of my old self heal too. One afternoon, I got a letter. No name on the front. Just a return address I recognized immediately, Daniel's. Inside was a short note. Mia, you were right about everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you found peace. Daniel. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in my drawer. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing not to carry the weight anymore. And I had carried enough. When people call you selfish for setting boundaries, remember they're really upset that their control is ending. Family should never be built on silence and submission. It should be built on respect even when it's uncomfortable. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't to fight or shout. It's to stand tall, walk away, and rebuild on your own terms. Because dignity, once reclaimed, shines brighter than any apology ever could. If you've ever been called selfish for choosing peace, know this: you're not selfish, you're self-respecting. Don't let anyone turn your kindness into their weapon. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. Because every week we share true stories of strength, justice, and quiet revenge.